Good morning, and welcome to day 12 of 365 Days of Stories with Theo Mayer. Today, the story of the Ching man. Ching, ching, ching. The sound of the rockman's pick against the stone of the mountain rang out. Blow after blow, he carved off piece by piece of the mountain, and loading them into his cart, he would take them into the kingdom and sell them. This was his job. This is what he did every day in order to do what he was called to do, but also to make what money he needed in order to live. Well, as he was working on getting rock out of the mountain, he noticed a sound coming to him from off in the distance. And he looked in the direction where that sound was coming from, and he noticed a huge cloud of dust building up. Well, he stood and watched it. And as he listened and watched, he could hear some faint sounds that were melodious, like music. He could hear tromping as well, almost like the beat of drums. And he watched. And as he watched, things began to get clearer. He saw a troop of soldiers leading this dust cloud as it was emerging. And he could hear now that the sound of that beating was in fact their feet as they marched forward. As this column of soldiers grew closer and closer, he could make out their uniforms and the swords that they carried at their sides and the spears that they carried in their hands, the helmets that they wore, feathers cresting each helmet. Their armor glittered in the sun. Behind the soldiers came chariots drawn by horses. Behind the chariots and the horses, elephants. On top of the elephants were canopies where the riders and a couple of soldiers sat. But after the elephants came dancers and musicians. This intrigued the stonecutter to no end. The dancers leaped beautifully into the air, twirled, turned. The musicians played, and the dancers, they played to the music, danced to the music in such a way that it brought delight to the stonecutter's heart to watch and listen as these beautiful sounds and playful images unfolded. And then, in the midst of all the dancing and the music, he saw there the Raja's own palanquin being carried by a number of servants, the curtains being drawn open, and the Raja himself sitting there, swaying a little bit back and forth as the palanquin moved as it was being carried along. But he was smiling and obviously enjoying every moment. He was clothed in beautiful silken garments, had a turban on his head with a stone in the middle, and two feathers that came up from the turban. The stonecutter thought as the Raja passed. And then a most amazing thing happened. The Raja, he could see him in the distance, would clap his hands. And when he did, there was a young boy that was running alongside, walking sometimes along the palanquin, and he would take a grape from a bowl that he carried with him and hand it up to the Raja. Oh my, thought the stonecutter. What a life that would be. Look at how I toil. My arms covered with dust and sweat. My sore body, by the end of every evening, I lay it down. Ah, how pleasant it would be to live a life, the life of the Raja. Well, with that, he put his pick down, leaned it up against the rocks that he'd been working on. He left his cart laden with stone right there, side of the mountain, and he began to walk almost as if in a daze toward his hut, which was some distance off. Like a blind or a drunken man, he walked step after step, almost dragging his feet at a pace much slower than a walk. When he got home to his very small little cottage, his little hut, he sat down in the one chair that he had that was there by the table. In the corner was his bed. There was a small stove there made of earth to cook with. Fire was cold. It had gone out while the stonecutter had been working. He got there, and by the time he got there, the sun was setting. He took a candle and lit it, sat by the table for a while, in thought. Some stream of thought just kept going through his mind. He didn't look like he was so much at peace as a bit disturbed and quite occupied. Well, eventually he got up from the table, made his way to the bed, you'd think to sleep, but there he sat down again and sat on the straw mattress. His eyes were open, and it was as if he was looking off in some other world. He put his hands together, and he said with great conviction, let me be the Raja. And with that, his hands dropped to the side, and he lay down in his bed. The night passed. He awoke, and when he awoke, he sat up and looked around. He did not recognize the surroundings at all. He looked up, and there above him was fabric, beautiful, gauze-like white fabric. You could see through it, but it encircled his bed, and when he suddenly moved a little bit, he realized he was in silken sheets. They were sort of a silvery color. As he peered through the gauze of the cloth that surrounded his bed, he saw that there were servants there looking on. And as he rose up, he put his arms up to stretch, wondering if this was just a dream or if it was real. And as he did, 3 servants came, one at the foot of the bed, one at either side, and they had brought with them slippers to put on his feet. One brought the beginnings of the undergarments of a robe, and then on the other side, one had a full robe. And as he sat there, They dressed and clothed him, and he scooted himself to the foot of the bed, and they all helped him out of the bed. And he could see along the walls dancers. And as he got up out of bed, some flute players began to play music that was beautiful to hear. On a table laid out was delicious food. There was warm tea. He looked in amazement. I am the Raja. I am the Raja. And with this, he began to conduct his affairs as any Raja would have, meeting with people in the morning, governing his beautiful kingdom. And after the noontime meal, taking a walk through beautiful gardens. Days passed, months passed, years passed. And in that time, the garden which he loved more than anything, he developed. Fountains he put in. He gathered animals from many parts of the world and inhabited the gardens with these animals. Brought plants, all descriptions and kinds, to grow there in the garden. Flowers, fruit-bearing trees and vines. It was a delight. It was like being in heaven to walk in the garden that the Raja had made. It was his greatest joy to go walking out in it, whether first thing in the morning or after a noontime meal, perhaps on the days when nothing needed to be done. This is where you would find him, with his wife quite often, surrounded by his children, servants there to wait upon him, music being played, dancers appearing from here and there, flags waving in the breeze when there was one. It was a delight, and many workers to do the work of keeping the garden beautiful. But then, as things are always changing and time has a way with us, a drought fell upon the land. Things dried out more and more. It was all he could do to keep the fountains filled with water and the fish and the lotuses and all of the aquatic plants continuing to thrive. But the plants outside in the garden that were not immersed in water at all times began to wither and die. As they did, the Raja grew more and more concerned. What was he to do? Then his animals began to die. And then there was not enough water to keep the fountains full. The fish died. His kingdom became quite barren because people had no food to eat. The drought had gone on for years. Many, many people had died. Those that had lived had left, but he was so attached to his garden and his kingdom that he did not even think of leaving. The sun beat down mercilessly. Its temperatures were hot. It was dry, dry, dry. He could hardly go out during the daytime. It was so hot. And he peered up at the sun, realizing that the sun was so much more powerful than he was. He did not touch his evening meal at all and sat in the chair just with a far-off gaze, as if he was thinking into a stream of thoughts that was very unlike where he was. And when he did get up and sat on the edge of the bed, that gaze was there still.